Hello. You have joined the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Boards of the CSB's public business meeting. We'll now begin the meeting with Steve Owens, chairperson of the CSB. Steve?
Well, thank you, Brian, and hello, everyone. And thank you all for joining us today. As Brian said, I'm Steve Owens. I'm the chairperson of the Chemical Safety Board. I want to welcome you all to our first public meeting of fiscal year 2025. And this is also our final scheduled public meeting for this calendar year. You know, this past year has been a very busy time for the CSB. As you all know, at the end of last year, we completely eliminated the enormous backlog and investigation reports that had accumulated under prior agency leadership and had plagued the CSB for so many years. And on top of that, separate from the backlog, in June of this year, we issued the final report for our investigation into the September 2022 fatal fire at the BP Husky refinery near Toledo, Ohio, which tragically took the lives of two brothers who worked at the refinery. As I said at our last public meeting, with the backlog eliminated, we are now getting back to performing our core mission as intended, which is conducting and completing investigations in a timely fashion. We now have 8 current investigations underway, more than the CSB has had in many years. We discussed 5 of those investigations in our last public meeting in July. The first of those investigations is the November 2023 fire at the Marathon Renewables facility in Martinez, California, which seriously injured an employee who suffered third-degree burns over most of his face and body. The second is the explosion and release of 870 pounds of highly toxic hydrogen fluoride and 1,700 pounds of chlorine at the Honeywell Performance Materials facility in Geismar, Louisiana, that occurred in January 2023. The third is our investigation into multiple explosions at the Dow Chemical facility in Plaquemine, Louisiana, that occurred in July 2023. The incident resulted in, which is a known carcinogen. The incident also injured nearby residents. As I said in July, the Dow and Honeywell, and we didn't initially deploy to those incidents when they first occurred. Instead, after we eliminated the long-standing backlog in our investigation reports, we began a new effort this year to conduct on-the-ground investigations into some of the incidents that previously were reported to the CSB under our accidental release reporting rule. For which we did not have the capacity to deploy more of those kinds of investigations hereafter, but it depends. Investigation is the fatal eruption and chemical release at the TSUSA liquid nitriding facility in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that occurred on May 30th, and that tragically resulted in the death of an employee. The fifth is another release of hydrofluoric acid that occurred on June 7th at the Honeywell facility in Geismar that seriously injured a worker. And as I noted in July, that's the same facility where our investigation of the January 2023 HF and chlorine release already was underway. Both investigations at the Honeywell facility are running concurrently, and the same investigation team is handling both. Importantly, also in conjunction with those 2 investigations, the team also is reviewing a tragic incident that had occurred at the facility in October of 2021. In which a Honeywell employee died after being exposed to hydrofluoric acid on unprotected areas of his face, ear, and neck when a gasket in some piping at the facility catastrophically failed. Along with those 5 incidents, since our last meeting in July, we also initiated investigations into 3 other recent incidents. The first is a hazardous ammonia leak that occurred at the Cuisine Solutions food processing facility in Sterling, Virginia on July 31. The release led to the hospitalization of 33 workers, with some in serious condition. The next is a major chemical fire that began at the Biolab facility in Conyers, Georgia on September 29. Roughly 17,000 people in the community near the facility were evacuated due to the fire, and as many as 90,000 others near Atlanta were advised to shelter in place due to the massive toxic plume of dark smoke coming from the fire, which contained chlorine and other substances. The CSB previously investigated another incident that occurred at the same biolab facility in Conyers in September 2020. We released our report on that incident in April of last year. Our report also covered yet another incident at a biolab facility in Westlake, Louisiana. Both of those incidents covered in our report involved the same substance that's of concern in this most recent incident. Finally, there is the release of hydrogen sulfide at the Pemex Petroleum Refinery in Deer Park, Texas, which occurred on October the 10th. 2 contract workers died as a result of the release. 35 people were injured and treated at the scene, and an additional 13 workers were transported to local medical facilities. The release also prompted a shelter-in-place order for 2 neighboring cities. So as I said, this has been a very busy year for the CSB. During today's meeting, you'll hear brief updates about these 3 recent investigations: Cuisine Solutions, Biolab, and Pemex. You'll also hear a presentation about recent activities relating to some of the recommendations that the CSB has issued. And finally, we want to show you our most recent safety video, which we just released last week. The video addresses our investigation into the fatal release of hydrogen chloride at the Walker polysilicon facility in Charleston, Tennessee, that occurred in November 2020. 1 contract worker was killed and 2 others were seriously injured when they were attempting to escape the release. Like all of our other safety videos, the Walker video is posted on our CSB's YouTube page. And as of this morning, the video already had been viewed over 230,000 times in just 6 days. But we want to show the video today as well, just in case some of you have not yet had the opportunity to see it. But before I turn the floor over to my fellow board members for their remarks, I want to remind everyone that at the end of today's meeting, at the end of today's presentations in this meeting, I should say, we will be providing an opportunity for public comments. In the interest of time, we ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes, and please use the icon on your screen to raise your hand so that you can be recognized to speak. If you'd prefer to submit written comments, you can send them to public@csb.gov. That's public@csb.gov. Now I'd like to turn this over to board member Sylvia Johnson for her remarks, and then the board member Kathy Sandoval. Sylvia, please go ahead, and then Kathy, please do so as well when Sylvia's concluded her remarks. Thank you all again very much for being here. Sylvia?
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first quarterly board meeting of the fiscal year 2025. I want to extend a warm welcome to our newest staff members. You've joined a talented team of dedicated public servants who believe that every safety lesson learned is a life saved. Your commitment strengthens our mission to protect workers, community, and the environment. As Steve highlighted, fiscal year 2024 was a significant year in the life of the CSB. The strides made by this team reflect a renewed focus, relentless effort, and a clear vision to fulfill our mission. Earlier this week, Executive Director Steve Kleist and I attended a leadership summit with Arkema's senior directors that have responsibility for facilities across the world for Arkema. This gathering provided a critical opportunity to connect directly with industry leaders and reinforce that safety is not a box to check, but a mindset to embrace. During the meeting, I shared our vision for rebuilding the CSB, emphasizing that revitalization is more than recovery, it's reinvention. Executive Director Kleist detailed some of our lessons learned in process safety management, as well as the importance of the CSB's accidental release reporting rule, which is a powerful tool that will assist and guide us in our efforts. The conversations we had with Arkema's leadership were invaluable. We demonstrated that the CSB is committed to asking the right questions, gathering the right data, and learning the lessons of the risks that matter most. Moments like these build confidence in the way we operate, ensuring that we remain transparent, agile, and deeply connected to the communities and industries we serve. Shortly, our team will update you on 3 of our active deployments, as well as give an update on some of our most recent recommendations. I'm pleased to report that our current capabilities and staffing levels enable us to respond swiftly and effectively. And with our internal process improvements, we put structures into place to turn today's challenges into tomorrow's successes. We're confident that we're on track to prevent future backlogs and enhance our operational readiness. Before I pass it over to my colleague Kathy, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to every member of the CSB team, from investigations to IT to our entire administrative team and the Office of General Counsel. It takes a united team to deliver on a bold mission, and every part of this team matters. Your efforts ensure that we continue to meet our mandate with excellence and integrity. Thank you, and now to you, Kathy.
So thank you very much, Sylvia, Dr. Johnson, and Steve. Welcome everyone to the CSB's board meeting. So very excited to discuss with you our activities to promote safety and protect communities, workers, and the environment. As Sylvia mentioned, the staff and board have been engaged in outreach with a variety of organizations. I had the opportunity to speak at the Edison Electric Institute's conference, discussing preparation for harsh weather and recovery operations, and also the opportunity and indeed imperative of coordination with communities and critical infrastructure, including chemical and petrochemical facilities, to better understand and serve their needs, and also to understand how to react in the event of potential hazards. As Steve mentioned, the CSB, in addition to clearing out the backlog, has engaged in numerous deployments. We've had 3 new deployments since our last quarterly board meetings, and you'll hear more about those incidents shortly. So I wanted to add my thanks to the staff for your work in everything that we do here at the CSB, including the deployments, which often take very quick arrangements and support by the whole range of staff to be able to get people to deploy to incidents in a variety of states. We continue to get reports, nearly 2 reports a week, about chemical and petrochemical incidents that meet the CSB's reporting thresholds. So while if we had more resources, we could deploy to many more incidents, part of what it tells us is that we all still have work to do collectively as a nation, in addition to at the CSB, to get to our goal of promoting chemical safety. So we are very excited that several of our staff members and our newest pathway members are doing an analysis of the reported incidents where we have not been able to deploy, and we look forward to their analysis and to the recommendations from that about how we can better serve our country, and it will help us to make the case for the resources that we need to ensure worker, community, environmental, and critical infrastructure safety. So thanks to everyone for your work and for your commitment to safety, and look forward to sharing with you more about the work that the CSB has been doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Sylvia, for your remarks. And with that, I will turn it over to Executive Director Steve Kleist, who is the Executive Director of our Office of Investigations and Recommendations for updates from both those offices. So, Steve.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon to everyone. The presentation from the Office of Investigations and Recommendations today will include briefings on the 3 incidents that Chairperson Owens spoke about during his opening remarks. We will also have a presentation from our Office of Recommendations on the major accomplishments and highlights from that office for fiscal 24. And then I will finish with a presentation update on the recruitment action that have been in place to support the agency's human capital plan in the Office of Investigations. So we'll begin with Supervisory Chemical Incident Investigator Lauren Johnson, who will take us through the Biolab and Cuisine Solutions incidents. Lauren, please proceed.
Thank you, Steve. First, I'll start with providing an update on the Cuisine Solutions investigation. Okay, so on July 31st, 2024, at approximately 8:20 p.m., an anhydrous ammonia release occurred at the Cuisine Solution facility's ammonia refrigeration system, which is located outside of their building, when an emergency pressure relief device opened. Workers were exposed to the ammonia when attempting to evacuate from the building. Loudoun County hazmat team also responded to assist with the release. As a result, 40 people were sent to the hospital. 36 were evaluated and released, and 4 were seriously injured and admitted to the hospital. One of the 4 people admitted was also admitted into the ICU. Everyone who was admitted to the hospital was released within a week. The CSB deployed a team of investigators on August 2nd to the Cuisine Solutions incident. During their on-scene work, the team conducted over 40 interviews and began evidence collection. As this is still an open investigation, the team continues to gather evidence and information related to this incident. And that concludes my update for the Cuisine Solutions incident. I will now give an update on the biolab investigation. So on September 29th, 2024, at approximately 5 a.m., the fire department was called to respond to smoke observed at Biolab's Conyers facility in Georgia. By 6:40 a.m., flames were visibly seen from the roof. The fire resulted in multicolored and dark plumes of smoke and off-gassing of chemicals, and the first shelter-in-place notification was sent at 7:40 a.m. on September 29th. So far, no injuries have been reported as a result of this incident. However, approximately 17,000 people evacuated the area, and shelter-in-place notifications were put in place up to 2 miles from the facility. Shelter-in-place warnings due to this incident lasted up to 18 days, and ultimately the fire at the facility completely destroyed and leveled the building. The CSB deployed a team of investigators to this investigation on October 2nd. During their on-scene work, the team conducted over 20 interviews and began their evidence collection. Again, as this is still an open investigation, the team continues to gather evidence and information related to this incident. And that concludes my update on the biolab investigation. I will now hand it over to Chuck Barbie.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm going to give a quick update on the Pemex Deer Park incident. On October 10th, 2024, at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, a hydrogen sulfide release occurred at the Pemex Deer Park facility's amine recovery unit, while workers were attempting to remove an isolation blind from piping that normally transports hydrogen sulfide gas. And for those of you that don't know, Pemex it's a refinery, and I mean an amine recovery unit. It's part of the process where hydrogen sulfide and other impurities are removed from the hydrocarbon gases. Now, the consequence of this incident, there were 2 fatalities. There were 13 injured workers that were transported to medical facilities for treatment. Pemex issued a site-wide shelter-in-place. Shelter-in-place orders were given at 2 neighboring cities, and a portion of Texas State Highway 225 was temporarily closed down. Deployment activities to date. As I said, the incident happened on October 10th. At the CSB, we were putting together enough information to make a deployment decision. And then the next day, October 12th, we had boots on the ground. The incident commander is Chemical Safety Incident Investigator Tyler Nelson, and his deputy is Chemical Incident Investigator Harold Butch Griffin. They showed up on October 12th, and the opening meeting was held. And then the rest of the team, consisting of Eddie Alvarez, Lissara Maldonado Piera, and Owen Tripany, they came in over the weekend. Since the deployment began, we've conducted over 30 interviews. We began the initial evidence collection, and like the other 2 investigations, this is an ongoing investigation, and it's in its early days. And with that, we'll move on to the next presentation. So this is going to be a presentation from the Office of Recommendations. One of the things I want to do right now is recognize Amanda Johnson and Adam Henson. They are recommendation specialists in the office, and the majority of what you're going to see next is due to their professionalism and tenacity. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk, or I'm going to give some highlights on some recommendations that occurred within 2024, fiscal year 2024. First of all, I'll start with the most notable recommendations that were closed. And then we're going to talk about some of our most responsive recommendation recipients. From there, I'm going to move into the Office of Investigation and Recommendation Advocacy highlights for fiscal year 2024. And then from there, I'll move into recommendations, data, and information, specifically issued recommendation status changes and closed out investigations. Okay, so we're going to start with the recommendations of note. The first one is from Donaldson Enterprises, Inc., Fatal Fireworks Disassembly and Fire and Explosion. This happened back in April of 2011. And this was, there were some seized fireworks, and they were scheduled for disassembly and destruction. During that process, and what they do is they break down the fireworks and they soak them in diesel is what they did at the time. As a result of that, there was an explosion and fire of those seized fireworks inside a storage magazine. And this resulted in 5 fatalities and 1 injury. In addition to many other recommendations, the CSB issued a recommendation to the Department of the Treasury, specifically their Office of the Procurement Executive. What we asked them to do is incorporate NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association 401, by reference into formal policies established by 2 other recommendations that we also issued to the Office of the Procurement Executive. Now, just to give you highlights on those 2 other recommendations, one was for contractor selection and one was for contractor oversight. And what we wanted in addition to that was the additional safety measures that NFPA 401 brings. Next slide, please. Well, what do they do? And actually, like I said, we're talking about this both from a wide-reaching perspective, but also from a responsive perspective when you start thinking about how quickly the actions took or actions happened within the federal government. As I said, R2 and R3, those were implemented within 11 months of the release of the investigation report. That is quick by federal standards. Then NFPA, they published the requested update to NFPA 401 in December of 2023. And then this and we closed their recommendation in March of 2024. Once we notified OPE that the NFPA recommendation was closed, they updated the acquisition procedures update 2406, and it was issued in July of 2024. So basically from the time we told them in March to July, that's how long it took them to implement this change. As a result of that, we gave them closed acceptable action. They did outstanding work in updating the Department of Treasury acquisition regulations, which includes the federal acquisition regulations. All right, next, and I spoke about them, it's either the last public meeting or the one before, is the Tesoro Anacortes Refinery fatal fire explosion and fire recommendation that was issued to the state of Washington. With regard to the incident, this occurred back in April of 2010. It was a catastrophic heat exchanger failure during a maintenance operation, and the explosion and fire caused 7 worker fatalities. As a result of this, we asked the state of Washington to augment their process safety management regulations for petroleum refineries in the state of Washington and with more rigorous goal-setting attributes. What did they do? They absolutely did that, very similar to what the state of California did. They adopted this rule in December of 2023. It went into effect a couple of days later. It applies to petroleum refineries and addresses things like damage mechanism reviews, hierarchy of hazard controls analyses, effective safeguards, root cause analysis, and stop work authority. They did, and this was a tremendous undertaking, which is one of the reasons that we are recognizing them. They did an amazing job, and as a result of that, we're closing this recommendation, acceptable alternative action. And last but not least, we're going to highlight Philadelphia energy explosions, refinery fire and explosion recommendation issued to EPA about this incident that occurred in June of 2019. There was a pipe elbow in a hydrofluoric acid alkylation unit that ruptured, and there was a huge release. Large vapor cloud ignited, causing multiple explosions and fire. The recommendation we issued to EPA was to revise the EPA RMP rule, which is the risk management program rule, which is contained in 40 CFR Part 68. We wanted them to require petroleum refineries with HF alkylation units to conduct a safer technology and alternatives analysis, and to evaluate the practicability of any inherently safer technologies identified. We wanted them to do this every 5 years as a part of their PHA. And March 11, 2024, final rule was published in the Federal Register. Went into effect May 10th of 2024. It met all of the recommendation requirements. And as a result of that, we closed that recommendation, acceptable action. And that was a huge, huge recommendation. So well, good job, EPA. Right now, we're going to shift to recognizing our most responsive recommendation recipients of fiscal year 2024. We're going to start with Synovus. We issued them 14 recommendations between 2 investigations, BP Husky and the Husky investigations. And those were relatively recent. They immediately closed 6 of them right off the bat. And since that time, we've got responses for the remaining 8 that indicate full or partial implementation. And so we look forward to reviewing those and making our presentation to the board. Another of our responsive recommendation recipients is Carrare. We issued them 12 recommendations. They immediately responded to all of them, and 6 were eligible for closure. We also advanced 5, and what that means is we take it from open awaiting, awaiting some kind of action, to another open status like open acceptable response, which is what these were in this case. So 5 more were advanced to open acceptable response, and we have additional responses indicating full or partial implementation of those. So we're looking forward to reviewing those responses as well. Next, we have Optimabel. We issued them 4 recommendations. Every one of them are closed. Vacher, we issued them 4 recommendations. 3 of those are closed. 1 of those is advanced to open acceptable. They are installing multiple egress points on several platforms, and that does take a while. So because they were waiting to find out when they finish that task. And then TPC Group, we issued them 3 recommendations, and all of those were closed. So we wanted to recognize these recommendation recipients in an effort that hopefully other recommendation recipients will emulate their outstanding responsiveness. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to shift, and we're going to talk about the Office of Investigation and Recommendation Advocacy highlights. Now, the reason we do this is because these are the activities when we go out into the public and talk about them that drive the closure of our recommendations. So first, we're going to start off with the magazine articles. This year, we had 2 magazine articles published. One of those involved, there we go. Sorry, I was shuffling amongst my papers. My apologies. One was called The Dangers of Dust. It went to the Fire and Safety Journal of the Americas out in the winter of 2024. And the other was The Need for Process Safety Management Regulation Reform. This went to the American Bar Association Natural Resources and Environmental Journal. It also went out in the winter of 2024. Then we gave 14 presentations to various industry groups, professional associations, etc. These involve various different topics to various different groups. All of them have been well received. And again, that drives the safety message, as well as has hopefully the intention of closing some of our open recommendations. We attend standards development meetings really regularly, but we had the opportunity to go out in the field and attend some of their committee meetings in person. In particular, this year we went to 10. Some of those were to the National Board Inspection Code Committee as a result of trying to get Lloyd Lang R8 implemented by the National Board of Boiler and Pressure Vessel Inspectors. We went to several NFPA committees. One of those was NFPA 660 code, which is the combustible dust code, the new one. We went to that to get the Didion R13 implemented. And then we went to NFPA 55 committee, and that is the compressed gases and cryogenic fluids code. And that was to get FFG R11 implemented. So every one of these that we attend, we basically have an open recommendation that we are trying to influence its closure. We also went to the International Code Council, ICC, to talk when they presented on the fire code and the building code. For the fire code, we were looking to influence the implementation of FFG R12, CAR R11, and Third Coast R3. With the building code, VACA R9. So again, every time we go to one of these, it's to try to influence the implementation of one of these recommendations. And then we gave comments, official CSB comments to the Federal Register on various notices of proposed rulemaking and other types of things like that. One was to US EPA's RCRA for their open burning, open detonation notice of proposed rulemaking, and that's to influence the permitting of fireworks disposal. We wanted to tighten down on some of those requirements. OSHA's emergency response notice of proposed rulemaking was another one. That's a great rule, and we gave some general comments to hopefully improve it. And then OSHA's voluntary protection program. We wanted to address some things that were very specific to PSM covered facilities. And lastly, we issued the CSB safety study on remote isolation of process equipment that resulted in 3 recommendations that were issued, and we're very proud of that. And I hope everybody has a chance to look at it. Next slide, please. All right, now we're going to get into fiscal year 24 recommendations, data, and information. I pulled this quote from all of our reports. It's right before the recommendation section. It says, to prevent future chemical incidents and in the interest of driving chemical safety excellence, to protect communities, workers, and the environment, a CSB makes the following safety recommendations. And this fiscal year, we made 46 of those. 7 from the Yankin Majestic investigation, 13 from Didion, 12 from Foundation Food Group, FFG, 4 from Wendland, 7 from BP Husky, and 3 from the CSB safety study that I mentioned earlier. So 46. Now, fortunately, we also closed 46. So we didn't fall behind in our open recommendations. We kept up with the investigation side of the house from the Office of Recommendations. 40 of those were closed acceptable, only 1 unacceptable, which means it was not implemented. And 5 were superseded recommendations. And what those are is when we do an investigation and we find that we're going to issue a recommendation to a recommendation recipient that we previously issued one to on the same topic, but we have an improvement on that recommendation, we will close the previous one and issue another improved recommendation. And so we did that 5 times this past fiscal year. And then we advanced 28 recommendations. And I talked about that earlier. That's when you move it to a new open status. 21 of those were moved to acceptable status, and 7 of those were unacceptable. And the reason we do the 7 unacceptable and we put it as open is that gives them a chance to understand, okay, that this is not going in the right direction. We have the ability to step in, coordinate and work with them more to try to, as I like to say, get that frown turned upside down and move it into an acceptable direction. Next slide, please. Aha. And so one of my colleagues took this picture at the last public meeting. So when I arrived here in August at the CSB in August 2016, there were a total of 781 recommendations. And as of July 25th, 2024, the CSB issued its 1,000th recommendation. So that's a big milestone for us. Now, at the end of the fiscal year, we had 851 closed recommendations and 149 open. So 85% of our recommendations are closed, and we're very, very happy with that number. Okay, so I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. I don't think I've mentioned this kind of thing before. This year, we completely closed out 6 investigations. And when I say completely closed out, what that means is we closed all the recommendations associated with that investigation. And this is where I talk about tenacity and professionalism of the recommendation staff. They have the memory of an elephant. They never forget. And if you look, this particular incident happened in 2001, back when we first started doing investigations as an agency. So we never forget, and they're like dogs with a bone. They never let it go. So we are always trying to drive towards positive implementation. And in this case, Motiva Enterprises sulfuric acid tank explosion has happened in Delaware City, Delaware. It happened on July 17th of 2001, and this was a hot work incident. Now, they were doing hot work to repair a catwalk above a sulfuric acid storage tank farm. Spark ignited flammable vapors in one of the tanks, and we had explosions and fire. Consequences were there was 1 fatality, 8 were injured, and there was significant environmental damage. The report was released in 2002, and there were 19 recommendations associated with it. Next slide. Our second one we're going to talk about is Xcel Energy Company hydroelectric tunnel fire in Georgetown, Colorado. This happened on October 2nd, 2007. And they were coating the inside of a hydroelectric power plant tunnel with an epoxy using highly flammable solvents. Fire erupted, and this was 1,000 feet underground. Consequences of this incident were 5 fatalities and 3 injured personnel. This report was released in 2010, and it had 20 recommendations. Excellent. Next is the oil tank safety study. So on October 31st, 2009, there were 2 teenagers, aged 16 and 18. They were fatally injured when a petroleum storage tank exploded in a rural oil field in Karnes, Mississippi. 6 months later, a group of young adults and teenagers were exploring a similar tank site in Waukesha, Oklahoma, when an explosion and fire fatally injured 1 individual. And then 2 weeks after that, a 25-year-old man and a 24-year-old woman were on top of an oil tank in New London, Texas, when the tank exploded, fatally injuring the woman and seriously injuring the man. So these are multiple incidents that occurred in these 3 states. Incident involved rural unmanned oil and gas storage sites that lacked fencing, signage, and they might have otherwise been or that were needed to deter members of the public from using them as places to gather. So the consequences of the study, which are again multiple incidents, were 44 fatalities and 25 injured personnel. That report was released on 2011 with 6 recommendations. Donaldson Enterprises, Inc., fatal fireworks, disassembly, explosion, and fire. We already talked about that one. That happened in 2011. Consequences were 5 fatalities and 1 injured person. And that report was released in 2013 with 12 recommendations. Arkema. I think we just talked that we had visited with Arkema recently. The Arkema Inc. chemical plant fire in Crosby, Texas. This happened in August of 2017, and as a result of flooding from Hurricane Harvey, which disabled a refrigeration system at the plant, which manufactures organic peroxides. And as the trailers increased in temperature, the peroxides spontaneously combusted. Consequences of that were a 1.5 mile radius evacuation. The report was released May of 2018, and it had 5 recommendations. And then, last but not least, TPC Port Neches explosion and fire in Port Neches, Texas. This happened in November of 2019. A series of explosions occurred after a butadiene released from a process unit, resulting from excessive popcorn polymer buildup due to a dead leg in the piping system. The consequences were 5 members of the public were injured, 3 workers were injured. There was a 4-mile radius evacuation, waterways were shut down, and there was significant environmental damage. This report was released in December of 2022 with 5 recommendations. Don't go to the next slide yet. So there's a reason that I gave a presentation on all of these and talked about how many recommendations. So next slide. So to put this in perspective, these are just 6 recommendations addressing 55 fatalities, 45 injured personnel, significant public impact. That includes evacuation, shelters in place, closures of highways and waterways, significant property damage, and environmental damage. As a result of those 6 investigations, 67 life-saving, injury-preventing, environmentally protecting safety recommendations were issued. And every single one of them are now closed. So if Executive Director Kleist or any member of the board or the public or anyone else wants to ask me if fiscal year 2024 was a good year for driving chemical safety excellence, I think I would have to say, you're darn right it was. With that, I will say thank you and pass it back to Executive Director Kleist.
Well, Chuck, thank you and your team for the outstanding work that you do to advance the agency's very important safety message through our recommendations program. And also thank you, Lauren and Chuck, for the presentations on the most recent deployments that the agency has engaged in since our last public business meeting. The next item I'd like to brief our listeners on is an update on our human capital plan. One of the strategic objectives of the agency is to increase our investigative capacity so that we have the opportunity to deploy to more incidents, to share learning from these investigations, as well as to maintain a higher state of mission readiness within the agency. And I'm pleased to report that we were able to onboard an additional 5 investigators since our last public business meeting. We were able to successfully have start with us in the Office of Investigations 3 chemical engineers to support our current operations. This would be Grace Anglis, Nathan Bremer, and El Snyder are now members of the Office of Investigations team. We've also continued the very successful Pathways program that we have here at the CSB by onboarding 2 additional Pathways recent grad chemical engineers. Lotto Dolitz and Zach Reagan have joined the rest of the Pathways team to execute the agency's mission more effectively. And I'm also pleased to report that we had our first person complete the Pathways program. Owen Tripany has now been promoted from his Pathways status to a higher graded chemical engineer position. So congratulations to Owen. And please do continue the excellent work you've been demonstrating here at the agency. And we look forward to bigger and better things from you as the time goes on. Before I turn it back over to Chairperson Owens, I would like to share a recent experience that, and we had in a presentation that was done at the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association Summit, where Bill Steiner, who was the investigator in charge of the BP Husky, presented to a group of about 175 process safety professionals the key learning and findings from the BP Husky report. During the Q&A session, we had a gentleman stand up who complimented us on the quality of the report, particularly the safety issues that we identified, the depth in which we covered the safety issues, and the quality of our analysis of those safety issues, and described it as a must-read for everyone in the room. He happened to be the director of process safety for a major United States-based, and also they operate internationally, petroleum refining and petrochemical manufacturer. So feedback like this reinforces the work that we have accomplished here at the agency and the way in which it is recognized by our stakeholder groups. So we thank all those who continue to use our reports to enhance process safety, and we will continue to earn the respect of our stakeholder group by producing quality reports similar to the BP Husky report. So I wanted to share that with everyone before I pass this back on to Steve Owens. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Chuck and Lauren, for those great presentations. I just wanted to make a couple of comments before we move on to show you the Wacker video. One, as you could see from the presentation that Chuck Barbie gave about our recommendations, he said that this has been a very busy year. They have been very active over there. We issued a lot of recommendations when we were clearing up the backlog, and we've been closing a lot of recommendations as well. And so that's an extremely important aspect of the work that we do here at the CSB, because while we spend a large amount of time in conducting investigations and determining the cause, a probable cause of chemical incidents, the real key are the recommendations that we make and the change that comes about as a result of those recommendations. And without the collaboration and cooperation of the recommendation recipients, as Chuck indicated, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. So we wanted to take some time in this meeting, as Chuck did, to commend several of the recipients who not only implemented the recommendations as we had recommended, but in a couple of cases went above and beyond what we had recommended to be done. And in several of cases, as Chuck also indicated, they did them with a bit more speed than we're used to with some recommendations recipients in terms of the length of time it takes for recommendations to be implemented. So we wanted to at least acknowledge those entities for the work that they've done and following up on the recommendations that we made. I did want to say just a couple of other things. It's always a risky thing to correct Chuck Barbie, and so I may get in trouble for this, but I just wanted to make one small correction to something that he said. I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe that the Washington State RPM regulations go into effect in December of this year and not December of last year. I don't want anyone calling us and asserting that we somehow implied that they weren't in compliance with regulations that hadn't yet gone into effect. So if I find out I'm wrong on that, I'm sure Chuck will let me know. But I think that's the case. But last but not least, as Steve Kleiss did, I also want to congratulate and commend Owen Tripany for graduating. I guess I'll use that word to a full-time actual investigator for the CSB. I think many people know what the Pathways program is, but for those of you who don't rather, it's a program that's provided by the federal government for recent college graduates or graduate school graduates to come into the federal government to spend a year or so at an entry-level position within a federal agency, and then, as Steve indicated, to move up to a higher grade level with greater duties and responsibilities. And Owen just wrapped up his first year at the CSB, and we've been absolutely delighted to have him and the other two Pathways participants who came in at the end of 2023, and we're looking forward to both of them moving on up as well in the coming months. And this is a program that is a very important program, one that we've sort of resurrected after it had been dormant for a number of years at the CSB. And for anyone who's viewing this meeting today, if you know of people in chemical engineering programs or others at undergraduate universities, or who happen to be in graduate school somewhere where they're studying chemical engineering or mechanical engineering or other sciences and technology majors that would be relevant to the work that we do here at the CSB, please have them to pay attention to what we're doing and see if this is the kind of work that they might be interested in performing. Because as Steve had indicated, we're still trying to beef up our investigation team, and we've been very successful in that so far, but we still have a lot more work to do. So with all of that, I want to now turn our attention to our video. As I indicated, it's for the Wacker polysilicon facility investigation. It's in Charleston, Tennessee. The incident occurred back in November of 2020. One contract worker was killed, and as Chuck alluded to in his presentation, there was an issue of scaffolding, and we'll learn some simultaneous operations taking place that led to the unfortunate outcome there. And two of the other people who were doing work on that platform also were seriously injured, in addition to the worker who was killed while they were trying to escape the release of hydrogen chloride that took place. So with that, Brian, can you tee up the video and we'll take a look. So.
November 13th, 2020, Wacker Polysilicon North America in Charleston, Tennessee. One worker was killed and two others were seriously injured when attempting to escape a hydrogen chloride gas release. An additional worker was injured from exposure to the hazardous hydrogen chloride.
This tragic incident was completely preventable. The CSB's report identifies several critical issues that must be addressed to ensure safe operations. Those include the need for written procedures, control of hazardous energy, greater guidance on simultaneous operations, and improved means of egress.
Wacker's Charleston, Tennessee facility manufactures various silicon-based materials that are used in the production of a variety of products. On November 2nd, 2020, the company initiated a 2-week turnaround of its hydrogen chloride regeneration unit to perform routine maintenance as well as equipment upgrades and repairs. To assist with the turnaround, Wacker employed contract workers from multiple companies, including Jake Marshall and Penn Gulf. On the morning of November 13th, Wacker issued a work permit to Jake Marshall to perform maintenance on a heat exchanger's vapor outlet piping. The work was to be done while hydrogen chloride was actively flowing through the piping. Exposure to hydrogen chloride gas can cause injuries, ranging from irritation of the eyes and lungs to severe burns or death. To protect themselves from those chemical hazards, the Jake Marshall contractors wore full-body chemical-resistant suits, rubber boots and gloves, and full-face respirators with acid gas cartridges. The maintenance took place on the 5th floor of an equipment access structure, which only had one staircase for entry and exit. That morning, contractors from Penn Gulf were also working on the same 5th floor platform. The Penn Gulf employees, however, were performing insulation activities that were not expected to involve potential exposure to hydrogen chloride. For their insulation work, the 4 Penn Gulf contractors were wearing the minimum personal protective equipment required by Wacker. flame-resistant clothing, steel-toe safety boots, as well as safety glasses and hard hats. They had escape respirators and safety harnesses in their possession, but were not actively wearing those items. The Jake Marshall contractor's task was to tighten bolts on the heat exchanger's vapor outlet piping in order to minimize leaks. The amount of force required to tighten a bolt is based in part on the materials of construction of the equipment being connected. The amount of force is called the torque requirement. The vapor outlet piping included both a nozzle made of graphite and lined piping constructed of carbon steel. In this case, the torque requirement for bolts connecting steel to steel is higher than the torque requirement for bolts connecting steel to graphite, as graphite is a very brittle material. But on the day of the incident, Jake Marshall pipe fitters were not given written specifications for every bolt they would tighten. A Jake Marshall journeyman provided an apprentice pipe fitter with a torque wrench set to 40 foot-pounds, which is the setting for tightening the steel-to-steel connections. After tightening the bolts requiring 40 foot-pounds of torque, the pipe fitter then used the torque wrench to tighten bolts on the steel to graphite connection. But the manufacturer recommended torque value for those bolts is only 15 foot-pounds. As a result, the bolts were inadvertently over-tightened. At 10:04 a.m., the excess torque applied to those bolts caused the heat exchanger to crack. Hazardous hydrogen chloride released to the atmosphere between the workers and the only available staircase. Within 15 seconds, a large hydrogen chloride cloud filled the area, preventing the workers on the platform from seeing their surroundings. The apprentice pipe fitter quickly moved away from the release. As he did, his chemical suit became entangled on surrounding equipment and tore open. This exposed him to hydrogen chloride, which caused chemical burns. In the chaos, he bumped into equipment on the platform, which knocked off his respirator. Although he was located closest to the staircase, without a respirator, he could not pass through the hazardous cloud to exit. Instead, he moved to the opposite side of the platform, where the other contractors had been working. 3 of the 4 Penn Gulf employees put on their escape respirators. But without chemical suits, they were unable to walk through the cloud to reach the staircase located on the opposite side of the platform. Instead, they attempted to climb down piping on the side of the structure, which was approximately 70 feet high. While climbing down, all 3 fell to the ground. 1 worker was fatally injured from the fall, and 2 sustained serious injuries. The remaining Penn Gulf worker was able to put on her escape respirator with help from a Jake Marshall worker, who, wearing chemical-resistant PPE, also attempted to shield her from the hazardous hydrogen chloride. The dangerous release continued for approximately 3 minutes, until all the gaseous hydrogen chloride had escaped from the system. After the release stopped, the 3 Jake Marshall workers and 1 Penn Gulf worker used the staircase to evacuate the area and safely reach the ground. The Chemical Safety Board launched an investigation and found 4 key safety issues contributed to the incident. They are written procedures, control of hazardous energy, simultaneous operations, and means of egress. The first safety issue concerns written procedures. OSHA's Process Safety Management Standard and the EPA's Risk Management Plan rule required Wacker to implement written operating and maintenance procedures for covered processes and equipment. These should have included clear instructions for how to tighten the different types of connections present on the heat exchanger's vapor outlet piping. But the CSB found that Wacker did not have a written procedure to execute the task. Instead, Wacker relied on verbal instructions and the piping manufacturer's equipment manual to communicate the torque requirements to the Jake Marshall contractors. The manual, however, did not include the torque requirements for the bolts that were eventually over-tightened. Those requirements were included in the manufacturer's drawing of the heat exchanger, which the Jake Marshall pipe fitters did not have in their possession at the time of the work. The CSB learned that the correct torque requirements were verbally communicated by the Wacker permit authorizer to the Jake Marshall foreman. The foreman then relayed the torque requirements to the journeyman pipe fitter, who finally communicated the information to the apprentice, who ultimately tightened the bolts. But the lack of clear written information and reliance on verbal instructions increased the likelihood of miscommunication and misunderstanding of the task and precautions.
Written procedures, which consolidate information required to safely execute a given task into easy-to-understand instructions, are a critical tool for ensuring safe operations and maintenance activities. Had Wacker used all relevant sources of information to develop written procedures for tightening each type of connection on the vapor outlet piping, it is likely that the contractors would have known about the specific torque requirements, which would have prevented this incident.
As a result, the CSB recommended that Wacker Polysilicon develop detailed maintenance procedures for torquing activities. The second safety issue identified by the CSB is control of hazardous energy. The CSB found that Wacker had procedures in place for performing work on equipment that contained hazardous energy, such as pressurized chemicals. These procedures included safety precautions, such as developing an energy isolation plan, wearing PPE, and barricading the area to prevent access by workers not involved in the operation. But even though the heat exchanger vapor outlet piping contained pressurized hazardous chemicals, the company did not apply those procedures to the torquing operation. That is because the torquing operation did not involve the intentional opening of the process equipment. As a result, Wacker did not develop an energy isolation plan, nor did they perform a risk analysis to determine whether the torquing could be safely performed on equipment in operation. Also, Wacker did not barricade the area to prevent other workers, such as the Penn Gulf insulation team, from being in the area when the work occurred.
Companies and workers should always assess and address the risk of performing maintenance on equipment containing hazardous materials, not only when they plan to intentionally open piping or equipment, but also when equipment could be unintentionally opened, like what happened at Wacker when workers inadvertently damaged fragile graphite equipment. Had Wacker adequately assessed the risk, they could have identified several ways to either prevent the incident or lessen its severity, such as through energy isolation, PPE requirements, or by restricting non-essential personnel from the work area.
Therefore, the CSB recommended that Wacker develop policy requirements to ensure that torquing activities performed on equipment containing hazardous energy are performed safely, and document these requirements in procedures. The third safety issue discovered by the CSB is simultaneous operations. Simultaneous operations, or SIMOPS, is defined as a situation in which two or more operations occur together at the same time and place. The simultaneous work performed by Jake Marshall and Penn Gulf personnel on the platform was a type of SIMOPS. The CSB found that Wacker did not have a policy or procedure for evaluating SIMOPS. Such a policy would require a hazard assessment to identify risks introduced by the simultaneous work. Instead, Wacker did not perform a hazard assessment and allowed the 4 Penn Gulf workers to be on the 5th floor platform without chemical protective PPE, while the more hazardous torquing work was also occurring. Ultimately, the 4 Penn Gulf workers were unnecessarily exposed to the hydrogen chloride release, causing 3 of them to take drastic actions to escape.
Companies should always consider how SIMOPS could impact workers and operations. SIMOPS should be identified and controlled by conducting a hazard assessment before starting work, and steps should be taken to prevent any hazardous interactions.
As a result, the CSB recommended that Wacker develop and implement a formalized SIMOPS program addressing co-located work tasks. The CSB also determined that industry guidance regarding SIMOPS has largely been restricted to offshore processing, such as oil and gas drilling. In fact, during its investigation, the CSB was unable to identify any codes, standards, or regulations specifically relating to the identification and control of SIMOPS for maintenance activities conducted on stationary source chemical processes.
The CSB has investigated at least 5 other incidents involving SIMOPS, all of which led to the injuries or deaths of individuals not involved in the event that started the incident. To prevent other needless tragedies, the CSB believes that the lack of regulation and guidance surrounding SIMOPS is a safety gap that must be rectified.
In its report, the CSB recommended that OSHA promulgate a standard or modify existing standards to require employers to ensure the coordination of SIMOPS involving multiple work groups, including contractors. The agency also recommended that the Center for Chemical Process Safety develop and publish a safety product on safe work practices, including detailed and practical guidelines for evaluating SIMOPS. Finally, the last safety issue identified by the CSB is means of egress. The CSB learned that Wacker performed a process hazard analysis 3 months before the incident, which identified the need for a ladder or some additional means of egress on the equipment access structure in case a hydrogen chloride release blocked workers from accessing the stairs. Prior to the incident, multiple employees also discussed concerns with Wacker management on the need for a secondary exit on the structure. But the CSB found that Wacker did not take any action to address these concerns before the incident. The CSB interviews with Wacker employees indicated a perception among the workers that management deferred employee concerns because Wacker management understood the building to be designed per code. As a result, 7 workers were present on the 5th floor platform during the toxic release, with blocked stairs as the only point of egress.
While building codes are an important foundation in design, they do not necessarily consider the specific hazards posed by a given process. Companies should prioritize the implementation of PHA findings and employee input to control hazards identified by those closest and most familiar with the facility and operations.
The CSB learned that Wacker designed the equipment access structure with a single point of egress based on building code requirements for an unoccupiable equipment platform and were not required to add an additional means of egress. But these codes do not address scenarios like the ones at Wacker, where elevated equipment platforms are used for accessing equipment containing materials that pose physical and health hazards.
The absence of regulatory guidance and standards on means of egress from open-air industrial structures directly contributed to the severity of this incident, and we believe companies need stronger guidance on this issue. Our investigation found that it has been nearly 50 years since another safety organization, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, issued a publication describing these gaps in guidance for worker egress from elevated workstations. NIOSH had called for specific codes and standards to address these egress issues in 1975, but these concerns have not yet been addressed.
Therefore, the CSB made recommendations to the International Code Council and the National Fire Protection Association to amend their codes to address conditions that may require multiple means of egress from elevated equipment platforms used for accessing equipment containing materials that pose physical and health hazards.
What should have been straightforward maintenance by 2 separate groups of workers turned deadly because of several serious safety issues. The CSB believes that our findings and recommendations will address the issues found at Wacker and prevent another needless tragedy. Thank you for watching this CSB safety video.
For more information, please visit csb.gov.
All right, I think it's back to me, Brian. So I want to thank everyone for your indulgence in watching the video with us. We think there are a lot of very important safety lessons to be learned from that incident there. As Kathy Sandoval said in her comments, something that was intended to be a fairly straightforward procedure turned into a great tragedy because of a combination of events and a number of safety issues which were identified in the video that need to be addressed, not only by the company, but by regulatory agencies and other entities to make sure that this doesn't continue to happen. These types of incidents where we have simultaneous operations and other things going on hereafter. So as I indicated at the outset, that video, along with every other safety video we put out, is on our CSB YouTube page. If you're not familiar with that, you can Google just CSB YouTube, and it'll pop up. You can take a look at some of the other videos. As I also indicated, that one's already received 230,000 plus views in just the last 6 days that it's been publicly available. Many of our videos get not only hundreds of thousands, but millions of views. The most, so far to date, the most significant number of views that were received was on the one involving the TPC incident that Chuck referred to, involving popcorn polymer, which has gotten, I believe, over 3.5 million views so far in the time that it's been available. So these videos have a very significant impact, at least in our opinion, and from what we hear in terms of the feedback that we receive from people who use them, not only as safety training devices, but also as educational materials. We hope that people will continue to give them the kind of attention that we believe they deserve. And again, we appreciate you watching that with us today. And with that, I want to take us now to the public comment portion of the meeting. As I indicated in my opening remarks, this is an opportunity for people to make comments. We won't directly answer questions that you have, especially ones that are very specific related to investigation and including our ongoing investigations, but we'll try as best to be responsive both to your comments to the extent we can to questions that you provide. As I also indicated, we ask that in the interest of time, you keep your comments to 3 minutes, and that you also use the icon on your computer to raise your hand so that Brian can recognize you and unmute you so we can actually hear what you're saying. And then finally, as I also indicated, if you're not in the mood to verbally make a comment, but want to make it to the agency nonetheless, you can do so by sending a written comment to our website, which is at public, that's PUBLIC at csb.gov. So again, with that, Brian, we'll see what we have in the way of comments.
Yeah, again, use the raise your hand feature. Be glad to acknowledge you. If you wouldn't mind maybe stating your name and the organization you might be with, we can announce that the floor is yours.
We lulled them into submission, Brian, again, huh?
Yeah, usually at this point, there's quite a few hands raised.
We'll give them a little more time. I will say while we're waiting, just as a reminder to everyone, we have these meetings on a quarterly basis. Our next public meeting will be on January 23rd of 2025. It also will be at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So there'll be an additional notice that'll go out about that one as we get closer to the meeting. All of the meetings were noticed in the Federal Register, but mark that on your calendar for January 23rd of next year. So, and Brian, I see that we have at least one comment. So
we have one hand raised. I just, Althea, I just ask you to unmute. You should be able to unmute.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay, yeah, I am just a member of the public, a big fan of the YouTube channel. I have a degree in emergency management, but I'm not using it and don't plan to. But I really appreciate your content, and I just want to know, kind of on behalf of the CSB fan community, what can we do to support you guys and help you guys out and, you know, get more videos?
Well, I'll take a crack at that, and then if Sylvia or Kathy or Steve Kleist have thoughts on that as well. First of all, I just want to say thank you for participating in today's call and for your kind comments about the CSB. It's always good to hear that that people are not only paying attention but appreciate the work that the agency is doing. One of the things that is helpful to us is probably exactly what you're already doing, which is spreading the word out there. If people are not aware of the CSB and are not aware of our videos, make sure that they are, suggest that they take a look at our YouTube channel. We currently have over 350,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel, which is a pretty good amount, but we can always use more subscribers. And so spread the word that way, but also, to the extent that you're interacting with people in, I believe, Althea, you said you had a degree in emergency management with folks in with you have some commonalities in terms of your experiences and qualifications to make sure that they are aware of the CSB. And if they have thoughts or comments that they want to share with us of how we can do things better or make more information available to the public in a different way than we are currently doing that, we're always very interested in hearing those comments because we believe that transparency is very important. And we are trying to make as much information as we can public about not only our investigations, but as Kathy alluded to in her opening remarks about the incident report that we get in response to our accidental release reporting rule. We put that information up on our website. It's updated on a quarterly basis. I believe there should be some updated information up there now. If not, it'll be soon after this meeting. And since that rule has been in effect for the last 4+ years, almost 5 years now, we received over 440 incident reports that have been submitted to us that have involved, I believe, fatalities at 60+ facilities across the country, injuries at another 230 some odd facilities, as well as significant property damage at another 200+ facilities as well. So there's a lot of things that are still happening out there. The recommendations we talked about are intended to do as much as we can to help prevent the recurrence of incidents or other things that can contribute to catastrophic incidents. But the work that we're doing here takes resources, it takes support from the public and cooperation, we indicated, from our stakeholders. And so anything you can do in terms of spreading the word out there will be greatly appreciated. So, any thoughts on that, Sylvia, Kathy, or Chuck, or Steve?
Well, I would just echo your sentiment, Steve. I think it's very important to share the CSB and our learnings and safety videos across a number of disciplines. You mentioned that you're with emergency. You have a background on the emergency management side, and recently I spoke to the National Association of Title III professionals who do a bunch of the emergency response work, and they are always very appreciative. But we also learned that there are other industries that use our video. So if you have friends in industries outside of emergency management, feel free to share our videos and our website more broadly with your friends, because there's a lot of good information on the website to include previous reports, many of the recommendations that Chuck talked about earlier today. All of that is available on our website. And so we just encourage you to keep spreading the word. So thank you.
Great, thanks. And also through the Environmental Protection Agency also has local emergency planning committees that help to organize awareness and preparation for the potential for any chemical incidents. So coordinating with your local emergency planning committees, making sure that they are fully aware both of the hazards and are really thinking about these lessons proactively in terms of preparation, and then just continuing to spread the word about this so that we also can, the point is to get to the point where we improve chemical safety. I also think that it's worth noting, as we heard from Chuck Barbie's discussion, each of these incidents promotes a really long series of workflow that happens after them. So from investigation to development of a report to recommendations, and that whole process can take years. So we're trying to really regularize that process, and the willingness of the recommendations recipients to implement the recommendations promptly and to adopt them really is to the benefit of all of us. So getting out that message about safety is really critical for everyone.
Well, thank you.
I would echo all of the previous comments, but would also like to say that change comes with one person saying, why should we continue to do this? And also sharing the messages that we offer through our safety videos. Well, for the most part, apply to traditional industrial settings. You may come across a group of workers working with hazardous materials without the proper face protection, on their hands with respect to rubber gloves. And it doesn't take much to have an interaction that could save an injury, could save a life. So again, the sharing of our message in a very broad context is very important. But thank you for your interest in CSB safety messages.
Yeah, and so Althea, thank you very much for those comments. It's very helpful for us to hear your thoughts, and also Steve and Kathy and Sylvia for your comments as well. Brian, I think we have a comment from one of our more distinguished alumni here on the CSB. So.
Okay.
Hey, John.
Okay, I took a few minutes. Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yep, we can hear you, John. There you go.
Good. I just want to congratulate you on reaching the 1,000 recommendation level. That's it. It's good in a way, I guess. On the other hand,
that's right.
It's not good news because bad things are happening, but you're taking care of them. So you're doing a really good job. And it was especially for me, very happy to see that you were completing the recommendations made during my time at the board back from 2002 to 2012. And I certainly I recognized several of those, and it brought back memories, some good and some bad, especially the one, what was the company in Delaware where they had the explosion on the petroleum tank where the operator died. And I'm not going to go into the details of how he died, but it was very, very tragic, shall we say. My current position, or my current volunteer position, and it was just mentioned recently, I'm chairman of the local emergency planning committee here in Jefferson County, West Virginia. So I do get to use my CSB experience to travel around the state and talk about the issues. And one of the most, well, there's a very popular video that I show of chlorine release back, and I don't think it's a CSB video. It's actually a TV video, but it shows a chlorine release, and it shows an incredible bravery on the part of the emergency responders. So, as a matter of fact, today there was training here in the county on locating underground pipelines and avoiding incidents with them. So congratulations. I'm very, very proud of all the work you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Well, Well, John, I just want to say thank you for everything you did while you were a member of the CSB. As you indicated, you were on for quite a while, and a lot of great things happened during the time you were not only a board member, but also the chairperson of this agency. We're still learning from the work that you did while you were here, and trying to do the best job we can to keep on doing that kind of work as well. I also want to just thank you because you've been a fairly regular participant in these meetings, and I know you've got a million things that you're doing, not the least of which you mentioned just a moment ago, being the LEPC chairman in your county. But we thank you again for taking the time to take part in these meetings and for your kind words. I will say, I think Chuck Barbie's head's going to get bigger than it even was before with your compliments to him on his 1,000th recommendation. I'm looking forward to 1001, so we can move off of that topic at some point in the future. But until we do that, until we get the next report done that has or safety study done that has some recommendations, we'll continue to have an ongoing celebration about our 1,000 recommendations. So again, John, thank you very much for everything you've done. So.
Steve, I'm not seeing another hand. I guess we can give another few moments here.
Yeah, there was one other person who had raised their hands, but I think they either got tired of waiting or had something else they needed to do. But if anybody else has any comments, we're happy to take them. We still got a little bit more time here. I will say just one comment while we're waiting, and then we can wrap up if there are no other comments. When I was answering Althea's question about the need for information sharing and transparency and letting people know about the work of the CSB, you know, it's not just at the professional levels and all of that. One of the things that I've learned in my time on the board, one of the very early calls that I participated in as the, I believe I was just the interim executive of the agency and not yet the chairperson at the time, was a student who called in who was at a university where in their chemical engineering class, they studied process safety management. Might have even been a course on process safety management itself, and not only watch CSB videos, but part of their assignments were to do reports on CSB investigations. And my understanding is that they have a very robust program at that university. And if I can be so bold as to say, I would encourage other universities to take a similar tact and take advantage of the resources that we make publicly available here at the CSB through our website and otherwise, to utilize those in your classrooms to educate students, because we not only have a vested interest in this and protecting communities, workers, and the environment, and ensuring, as Steve Kleiss said, that people are also properly protected when they're in the workplace, but we have a somewhat selfish motive as well, because the more people who come out of educational institutions that are aware of these issues and the lessons that we've learned and tried to put forth through our reports, the safer workplaces will be, and the safer communities will be, and the better our environment will be protected. But also, as I indicated in my plea regarding the Pathways program, if some of those students have an aptitude for this kind of work and certainly an interest in it, send them our way, and we'd love to talk to them. So I filibustered long enough, Brian, that did anybody raise your hand? So
No new hands.
all righty, well, we'll let people go. I know it's getting late in the day. Before I wrap us up, I'll just turn it over to Sylvia and Kathy for their closing remarks, and then we'll let everybody go. So.
Well, thank you, Steve. And again, thanks to everyone who participated in our meeting today. You know, as I said in my opening remarks, I'm extremely proud of this team, because every step that we take forward, it strengthens the trust in our ability to respond to these incidents, investigate them, and drive chemical safety change. And I also want to join my colleagues in congratulating Owen Tiffany in becoming a full-fledged investigator now. And again, this is further evidence that we're moving the agency in the right direction, because what we're doing is building a pipeline of future investigators, and Owen is a testament to that. So congratulations, Owen. So we're excited for you and proud of you. And again, the work that this team has accomplished will continue. And it sends a strong message that when safety is prioritized, everybody wins. And so we're still committed to driving the CSB's mission forward. And with that, a lot of focus and dedication that has come to define this agency. So again, thank you all for attending today's meeting, and the support of our stakeholders continues to make the CSB what it is today. And so together, we're not just responding to incidents, but we're shaping a safer tomorrow. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you at our next meeting in January.
Thank you, Sylvia. And like to add congratulations to our CSB staff for their great work. Extra congratulations to Owen for your promotion. And thanks to everybody who's supporting the creation of this pipeline and the growth of the CSB. And the CSB work really reflects the tip of the iceberg of the tens of thousands of people in America who work on chemical process safety at all levels of work, and the hundreds of thousands of people internationally who work on these topics. And it is that daily work and that daily commitment to safety that can bring us not just to more awareness, but to more safety, so that we are able to avoid the terrible incidents that are sadly featured in our videos that we feature in order to help us learn, right? So that we can forestall these incidents that lead to worker injury, death, and job loss, and other tragedies, to community injuries, property damage, environmental injuries, and also often damage or destroy the plants or facilities. So avoiding these lose incidents is really the job of all of us. And, you know, we also heard about the role of community members, and thanks to former Chairperson Breslin for chairing your local emergency planning committee as your volunteer work. Really appreciate your bringing your expertise and dedication to that, and just illustrates that it takes the community and the efforts of all of us to really center safety and improve opportunity. So thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for joining us at this meeting.
All righty. Well, thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Kathy, and thanks all of you again for participating in the meeting. As we've indicated, our next public meeting will be on January 23rd next year at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we look forward to seeing all of you there at that time. So with that, Brian, we'll be adjourned.